Amy Lee and Jamey Volker, who are going to be tag teaming our first presentation. They are both with the UC Davis National Center for Sustainable Transportation, both working with Professor Susan Handy, and both have published research around the concept of induced demand and how highway projects impact driving and air quality. So I want to turn it over to Amy and Jamey, and you should be able to share your screens. Let me know if you can't.
Thanks, Autumn. I cannot share my screen, actually.
Okay, let's make sure we give all our presenters sharing privileges. Let's see, all panelists, I think I can do that. Okay, try it now.
We are on, thank you. Okay. You all should be seeing my presentation slides, right?
Yep, we can see it.
Fabulous. Thank you for having us here this evening. My name is Amy Lee. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Davis in the Transportation Technology and Policy Graduate Group. I'll let Jamey introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Amy, and thanks a lot for having us here today, Autumn. My name is Jamey Volker. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working with the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis as well. And I got my PhD recently from the same program that Amy's in, Transportation Technology and Policy.
Great. So we are going to do a very quick tour through the concept of induced travel. This is a bit of a run of show. We'll start with just a basic overview of induced travel and some evidence from the research. And then I'll turn it over to Jamey for some examples that are from California, and then how to think about this and how to apply this to actual project planning and transportation planning. So I'd like to start with an example that we are probably all quite familiar with. It is, let's say, a Friday afternoon. You just heard about a new restaurant or cafe or something that you might like to go try out in downtown Sacramento. You pull up Google Maps and you see that it might take anywhere between half an hour to an hour to get there. And you think, you know, I just don't know that I want to spend an hour in that congested traffic over the causeway. So you think about what your options are. So you maybe toggle over to transit and you see, oh, you know, you can actually get there in maybe half an hour if you hop on Capitol Corridor. Then you can get to that new spot you're interested in maybe 35 minutes. And that's because you get to zip by all of that traffic on the causeway and walk to your spot that you're interested in going to downtown. And this is what we can see is because of this congested condition. If you were to say go to lunch at that spot when it's not an off-peak, when it's not a peak time, you'd be looking at something from 20 minutes to maybe 35. And you know, if it took only 20 to 35 minutes, maybe you would make that trip. Maybe instead of being that once every few months trip, you would go there downtown because you actually really tried it out and you found out you love it. It's your new favorite spot. So you'd go there every few weeks. This is something that we grapple with all the time as people moving about the world. And it's this function of the capacity of our transportation network and the volume of driving on our transportation network, or the volume of cars, and it impacts how we make choices. And if you are a transportation engineer, been around this world, this might sound like I'm throwing out some familiar terms. Congestion we can think of as a function of vehicle volume over capacity. So how we try to address our congestion problems have traditionally, we've tried to address our congestion problems as transportation planners. And how we have historically tried to do that is by looking at the roadway capacity and saying, look, we just have too many cars for this given area. Let's expand our roadway capacity so that cars can operate more freely. They can go a little faster. And sure enough, in the short run, we do oftentimes see these faster travel speeds. You can go faster because there's this new capacity that these cars can now occupy. It shortens that travel time a little bit. So now you can maybe go grab that 20-minute, 35-minute trip to Sacramento from Davis. And you have that slightly less congestion in that short run time period. And you know, that actually gets us to another change in behavior where people drive more. There is this new driving that's created by those shorter times and less congested conditions. And we get into this feedback loop actually, where new driving actually creates congestion again, because there are these new trips on the road. There are new, well, I'll get into the causes of this, but we get into a feedback loop where that reduced congestion and lower time cost of driving actually increases it brings about new driving, and we can see the increase of congestion. We see congestion tick back up, and we see this process happen over and over again. This relationship can be explained by economic principles, kind of the building blocks of economics, supply and demand. And this is a relationship of the cost of something. In this case, we're thinking about the cost of driving, or as we all love to say, VMT. I'm sorry, the cost of driving, which we measure in time, and its relationship with driving. So with VMT, so the cost of something and the amount of something. And so in these kind of high cost situations, we see in the upper left, you get people demand smaller amounts of things. Something's really expensive, you tend to demand less of it. And when something is less expensive, kind of over on that, on the bottom half of our curve, you see over in that bottom right, you see when something is cheaper, we demand more of it. It's got the idea of buy low, sell high. Something's on sale, it decreases the cost of something, and we buy more of it. And then the supply of our transportation system, we can think of as, you know, we supply a transportation system, our road system, our bus system, our transit system, our bicycle systems. And that impacts the cost of our transportation as well. So when we have our demand and supply, we find equilibrium at some sort of, at that meeting point of our demand and supply curves. And that reaches some sort of quantity of VMT that is a result of that. And when we think about increasing capacity, what we're doing is we're shifting the supply curve. We have a new supply curve altogether. And what we see is we reach a new equilibrium point of the amount of driving that is consumed, because that increased capacity means lower time cost. And that shift in VMT is what we call the induced travel, that increase in VMT from a lower cost. So where does this new VMT come from? There are both short and long-term behavioral changes that induce VMT. There could be longer trips. In that case that I drew up for us, maybe instead of going to your spot in downtown Davis that you used to go to, you drive across the causeway to Sacramento. Maybe instead of it being a special thing that you do every few months for birthdays or what have you, you go every few weeks because you found your new spot and you can get there a little more quickly. You shift modes because instead of taking the train, which was pretty competitive compared to congested conditions, you drive, you don't take the train. And then there are things like route shifting. There are also long-term effects. Household or business relocation that comes about throughout that metro region. Let's say someone who currently lives in Sacramento moves to Davis because they know they can still get back to their favorite spot every so often, but they want to take advantage of the lovely bikeability of Davis. And also we see induce migration to the area, which increases demand for transportation in that area. So in the long run, we actually, I promise this is the last time I'm going to show a supply and demand curve. But what we see in that long run effect is in fact a shift in not only the supply curve, but also the demand curve. And perhaps sprawl, the new folks in a region, the moving around of businesses. Let's say a business moves further down a highway because now the accessibility is better, so they can go locate further down a highway and their employees can still get there. Those are all things that increase demand. They shift the demand curve for driving. And so we not only get those short run effects in that first arrow, but we get a long run effect in VMT, in induced travel. That's the basic gist, a very quick overview of supply and demand. This relationship is measured and really well documented in the academic research. So I will not go through these in detail, but a whole lot of different types of data and a lot of different methods have been used to actually measure, not just kind of theorize, but actually measure the effect of induced travel in various metropolitan statistical areas, urban areas throughout the United States. It's also been measured elsewhere in other countries and other continents. And the results are essentially that what we get is that a capacity expansion increases VMT at about a 1-to-1 ratio. So, and that is between a lane mile increase and VMT. So we're seeing in that short run, we get about a 3 to 6% increase in short run VMT over those long-term horizons of about 10 years. We're seeing all of the VMT that we were hoping to, or I'm sorry, all of that congestion that we were hoping to decrease has essentially come back onto the roadway. And the impacts is that where our congestion problem actually has not been solved. We cannot build our way out of it because of the changes in travel behavior that it spurs. So generally, we don't get much effect in the long run in terms of decrease in congestion. And a lot of those impacts that we're trying to solve, like air quality in certain corridors, that comes back along with it. And so essentially what we see in this research is that the driving increases along with capacity. I will hand it over to Jamey to show a few examples from California and closer to home.
Thanks, Amy. Can we just quickly go back 2 slides to the table of the induced travel studies?
Yeah.
Awesome. So the studies here that Amy mentioned, and on the next slide too, where you have the summary of the short-term and long-term elasticities. So these studies use decades of data and robust statistical methods to estimate average elasticities across generally urbanized areas. Most of these studies are nationwide, but there is also California-specific study that estimates similar elasticities in California's urbanized counties. And so in short, just to reemphasize what Amy just showed, there is strong, very strong empirical evidence of a large average induced travel effect in urbanized areas across the US and also California specifically. Now, because these studies present average effects across geographies and facility types, they don't, unfortunately, tell us how much induced travel was produced by specific roadway projects, nor do they tell us whether the induced travel effect differs between general purpose lanes, HOV lanes, HOT lanes, and purely toll lanes. And that's obviously of primary interest here for the Causeway project. But there is a recent study from researchers at UC Berkeley that helps answer those questions. And they do so with a study of 4 capacity expansion projects across California, 2 in Southern California and 2 in Northern California. All right, Amy, if you could advance to, yeah, here we go. All right, so here is this is from their report, which just came out in 2021. And this is just a map that shows the locations of the facilities that they studied and the control facilities they looked at as well, just to see if the effects they were looking at were happening on facilities that were not expanded. And so what they did in this study is Michael Anderson, a professor at UC Berkeley, and his colleagues used Caltrans loop detector data to compare traffic flows before and after recent lane additions on 4 California freeways. So you can see, hopefully you can make out from these maps here, but the 4 projects were first in the left-hand map, the top of that map, there's the Caldecott Tunnel on State Route 24 in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And so what happened there is they added 2 new general purpose lanes in 2013 through what is called the 4th bore. So there were 3 existing tunnels. They added a 4th tunnel, which basically added 1 additional lane of traffic in the non-peak commute direction, non-peak direction. And then the second project they looked at was an expansion on I-215 in San Bernardino County, which is in the right-hand map on the right side of that map. And that added 1 new general purpose lane and 1 new HOV lane back in 2010. The third project, again in Alameda County, is I-580, and that added 1 new hot lane in 2016. And then finally, in Orange County in 2014, an HOV lane along with some new connectors were added to I-405. And so all of these projects, these were all kind of traditional bottleneck areas, just kind of like the causeway is now. And what Michael Anderson and his colleagues were trying to do is kind of fill that gap in the research, look at can we discern if there's a different elasticity for different types of facility expansions? So does it make a difference if it's a general purpose lane addition? Is it an HOV lane addition, HOT lane? And they also wanted to just kind of ground truth a little bit. So obviously these empirical studies that show average elasticities are very well done. A lot of data, very strong, robust econometric techniques. But again, they provide an average effect. And so what this study does is provide some kind of specific examples to kind of illustrate on a ground truthing level whether there's an induced travel effect from specific facility expansions. All right, Amy, next slide, if you want. Thank you. And so what they found, and so they looked, instead of looking at VMT, they looked at a proxy for VMT, which is traffic flow on these facilities right around where the capacity expansions were. And they found flow increases on all the facilities. And they also ran some regression analyses to calculate implied elasticities. And you can see those bolded in the left-hand column there. And so you'll note that these are lower than the elasticities, the long-term elasticities estimated in the econometric studies that Amy discussed a few slides back. But you have to bear in mind that the elasticities estimated in the UC Berkeley study are the short-term elasticities. So Amy, if you could switch over to the next slide. All right, perfect. So you can see here now bolded in the left-hand column, that is the term, the time period for the elasticity. So these UC Berkeley researchers were estimating an elasticity on the order of 1 to 2 years rather than the long-term elasticities of 5 to 10 years estimated in kind of the best econometric elasticity studies that we have in nationwide and with California. And so this indicates, that you're going to have elasticities of between 1.5 and 0.8 after just 1 to 2 years. And as the authors of the study themselves noted, these are in line with other estimates of short-term elasticities and probably would increase to, in that same region, that same 1.0 elasticity region in the long term. And another thing to note, besides the elasticities and the time period for those, is you can see that the elasticities are greater for the managed lane additions than for the general purpose addition. So the one project that had just general purpose lanes, that was the fourth bore on the Caldecott Tunnel, the top row here in this slide, and that had the lowest elasticity. And now there are reasons for this, just based on the lanes in the Caldecott Tunnel were in the non-commute direction. But as the authors conclude, I won't go into all of the specifics about it. But as the authors conclude overall, Amy, could you switch to the next slide? Yeah, this is what they said. They said, overall, we find that the implied elasticities are similar across different types of lane expansions, and in all cases within the range of estimates from previous studies. And so this is kind of a first cut analysis using projects from California that looks at whether the induced travel effect occurs when you just expand lanes that manage lanes as opposed to general purpose lanes, and also takes a look at specific facilities. And the specific facilities, the elasticities were all in line with the existing research, the existing average effects. And they also show that across facility types, the elasticities are quite similar. And so that obviously has implications for using managed lanes to meet greenhouse gas emission and air quality reduction goals, meet VMT reducing goals. Amy, could you go to the next slide? And you know, as a result of these studies, all of the nationwide studies and these more recent studies that show maybe a similar induced elasticity from HOV and HOT lanes to general purpose lanes, you know, we've crafted at UC Davis, the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, an induced travel calculator that estimates the amount of VMT that would be induced by adding capacity to a class 1, 2, or 3 facility in California, and doing so with a general purpose lane, HOV lane, or an HOT lane. And based on the research, you know, we apply basically the same elasticity regardless of the project type, whether it's the lane type, whether it's HOV, HOT, or general purpose, though there is a different elasticity that's applied to class 2 and class 3 lanes. So kind of state highways and major arterials. The one thing that we don't have a lot of evidence for in terms of induced travel and the elasticity is toll lanes, strict toll lanes. So in that situation, you don't have users who are just carpool able to join the lane. The actual use of the lane is fully determined by the price at which you're charging entry to the lane. And so there's not a lot of data on that. However, there is some evidence from a recent study in Europe that shows that when you're doing a toll lane, you can actually significantly reduce induced travel. And so, you know, from our research, we believe generally, and that's why we have this in the calculator, that regardless of a general purpose HOV or HOT lane, all of those will kind of lead to the same induced travel. But there is an open question as to what would happen, what the elasticity would be with a strict toll lane. And so, you know, talking about kind of managing VMT, going with a strict toll lane has probably the lowest induced travel and, you know, induced GHG emissions, induced air quality problems, probably has the least chance of that. And beyond that, regardless of whether you're doing an HOT lane, an HOV lane, or a toll lane, if you can somehow expand transit with that, and I know that's an option for this project, facilitate transit, that could have benefits of switching people into transit and away from driving, and it can also have some positive equity implications for people who can't afford to drive with cars. Same goes for working on expanding active travel here. Unfortunately, with the available research, we're not able to predict the differences in induced travel for these various options. As far as we're able to go, based on the research that we've kind of summarized here, is that there's probably a similar induced travel effect from adding capacity on general purpose lanes, HOV lanes, or HOT lanes. And that approach, based on this literature, has been vetted by numerous other experts, and indeed, Amy, you could go to the next slide, has been actually adopted by Caltrans as their recommended approach for calculating the induced travel effect of new highway capacity expansions. And so they, in Caltrans, in its transportation analysis framework that it published in late 2020, they recommend using the NCST, the UC Davis induced travel calculator where feasible to estimate the induced travel effect. And
Jamey, I'm gonna say, I think we need to wrap up pretty soon so we can get to our other speakers.
Sounds good. I just wanted to show that I mentioned that there are these offshoots of our induced travel calculator you might see floating around out there as well, and they are all based in kind of the similar literature. So there's a shift calculator we helped develop with RMI and NRDC. RMI did its own calculator for Colorado, and there's also a kind of one-off adaptation for Portland, Oregon, among others. So you might see those. They're all kind of based in the same research. All right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Amy and Jamey, for that presentation. We're going to keep moving forward. I know there's a lot there, and I'm sure we all have questions, but we're going to keep moving forward. As Don mentioned, I think there's a lot of connections between these different presentations. So I next want to welcome Mark Lindsenmeyer, who is the Deputy Director for Express Lanes and Shared Mobility at LA Metro. Of course, we all know LA Metro, they're the countywide transportation authority for Los Angeles, the third largest transit system in the country, and they also are the transportation authority. So similar to YCTD, both a transit provider and a transportation planner for Los Angeles County. And Mark's going to tell us about how they've integrated transit into their express lane network. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Autumn. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, and we can see your slides.
Oh, perfect. System works. Again, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the rest of the presentations as well as the folks from Davis, so that was great. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background on the Metro system and then kind of focus the presentation on some of our transit rewards and subsidy programs that we fund through the express toll lanes. Just as background for those that don't know, we currently operate 2 express lanes, one the east-west corridor on I-10 and a north and south corridor on Interstate 110. They've been in operation 8-9 years. By many measures, they've been quite successful. We do have dynamically priced toll lanes. I can talk a little bit more about that as I walk through this. But essentially, we don't have any fixed prices, but it's based on the level of congestion or density on the express lanes. Just to talk a little bit about what we do at Metro, we always like to start with the fact that our express lanes are self-sustaining, in as much as we don't get any resources from the agency in terms of any of our sales taxes, Self-Help County and Los Angeles. So we do have 4 half-cent sales taxes. But the express lanes are all self-funded. Since its inception in 2012, which was our fiscal year 2013, we've seen steady increases in volume for the throughput, both in vehicles and people in the express lanes. I got FY20 on here, which obviously is when it starts to dip. But that was, I think, as a result of the pandemic and not necessarily additional congestion. The graphic on the right kind of just shows how we've weathered the COVID pandemic and the resiliency of the express lanes, both in terms of carrying vehicles and people through the corridors, as well as the revenue. As you can tell, in sort of March, April of 2020, when our first stay-at-home orders really took place, we had massive drops in volume across the network, across the system, throughout all the roads in Los Angeles County. The express lanes, our volumes dropped to about 20% of what we typically see. The resulting revenues dropped even further. However, after the initial sort of jolt from those stay-at-home orders, traffic started coming back fairly steadily, between 1% and 2% a week throughout the pandemic. We had another dip in January of 2021 when our second stay-at-home order tightened things back down, and then we've been growing back up to basically pre-COVID levels by late December of 2021. Although interestingly, again, the last 10 days or so, we've seen another dip south. So we continue to have impacts from COVID, but in general, the lanes have been pretty resilient. Again, I talked about the demand responsiveness to our pricing. We call it dynamically priced. It's based on real-time traffic, updated every 5 minutes. We charge based on the time and point of entry of what the lanes were at that point. During the peak periods, the base price, the floor of the pricing is 35 cents per mile, and it can go up to $2.10 per mile, depending on how much congestion and density we see in those lanes. If it gets overly saturated, we convert it back to an HOV lane, restricting all the paid vehicles from those lanes. Just to talk about the concept of operations, and this was really just to show our transponder. We do have a self-selecting, self-representing transponder where you can either select a solo driver, an HOV2 or an HOV3, and depending on where you are, you select that and can either travel for free or pay the posted toll rate. Obviously, the other piece of this is that all the HOV vehicles or users that had access to the lanes before we converted still have that same access for free. So we didn't change anybody's usage. We just, again, as the vernacular on express lanes goes, we're selling the unused capacity, so the space between vehicles that wasn't being used. What we've been able to achieve through the revenues that the express lanes generate has allowed us to do a couple of different things. The first one I'll talk about is our net toll revenue reinvestment program. And this program is a grant-funded program from again, solely from our express lanes revenue, our net revenues. And it awards any mobility improvement projects within a 3-mile corridor of either the 10 or the 110. We've had a couple rounds so far, totaling just under $50 million, and about 40 different projects sharing that 50 million. So it's been very successful. We anticipate going out again in the next 12 to 24 months with an additional round. Even though we've been doing this program for about 7, 8 years. Not all the projects have been completed yet, so we're still waiting for some of those 2016 awards to sort of get completed before we go out with another round. But hopefully you can see clear enough on the graphic that it's distributed pretty well between the east and west I-10 corridor and the north-south one. Got a lot of interest in it. The way we fund the program is basically targeting the different modes that we like to see awarded. And we've set targets at 40% go to transit projects, 40% to system connectivity, active transportation projects. We've got examples of each on the bottom. And then we do 20% essentially to Caltrans off the top for roadway improvements, including some of the incident management, signal syncs, intelligent transportation systems that help improve mobility on the corridors. And so we've got a pretty good ratio of how we like to see the funds being spent. In addition to the net toll revenue grant program, we also have a transit rewards program, also paid through the express toll lanes revenue. And this basically just rewards transit users that want to use the express lanes when they have a trip that they can't get to easily on transit, an appointment, an emergency, to work on time, whatever they might need to do, where they're normally taking transit, or we've encouraged them to mode switch to transit, but they'd still like to drive on occasion. We provide folks that take 16 transit trips a $5 toll credit. Our average toll is somewhere between $4 and $5 during peak. So it's about the price of one toll trip for 16 qualifying transit trips. And again, it's been well received. It's positive. We continue to tinker with it, both in the number of transit trips, and continue to evaluate whether the $5 toll credit's the right amount. You know, we don't like to give too much of a toll credit because it creates incentive disruption on our algorithm as we set the pricing based on demand on those corridors. Another thing that we do is provide direct transit subsidies to different users, different transit systems that operate on the express lanes. We have 4 operators that run routes across the express lanes. The top one on the line here is the Metro J line, the silver streak that we've had for a number of years. Then we've had the Foothill Transit also operating on our line. I took this picture of the Foothill Transit bus. That's another bus that the express lanes net toll revenue grants paid for. It's an all-electric double-decker bus. They bought 2 of them with our express lanes funds. And likewise, Torrance Transit and Gardena Transit also operate on the lanes. We've had similar subsidies going to them for different procurements for buses as well. Over the years, since 2015, we've spent about $55.6 million on these direct subsidies, which not only help defray operating costs, improve headways, increase reliability for those services, but also are able to get more buses on the road during those peak times, so that we can encourage people to have, you know, reasonable, reliable choices for traveling, not just relying on the automobile. And so between the net toll revenue grants and the direct transit subsidies, we're just over 100 million in total for the program, and it's, you know, 9 year history. We also offer a low income assistance program. I think there's going to be other speakers talking about this, so I'll just kind of mention that we have that as well. Let's see, what else do I got? Whoops, got a little crazy with it. I'm going backwards. Okay, there we go. Oh, also have the Clean Air Vehicle program. Again, we just offer a discount for the Clean Air vehicles. Obviously, they can access the lanes. If they are an account holder, we give them a discount. It's fairly modest. It's what our board approved. And so we continue to use it. We continue to support it, but they still do pay a fee. We're also members of the California Toll Operators Committee, which are all the member agencies that work in concert with one another, not only for interoperability, but for also making sure that we're all talking with each other and all understand both our needs and our future planning goals to help with interoperability. And again, I'll end with just looking at the future corridors in LA County, the success of the 10 and the 110, both from a congestion relief standpoint, as well as hopefully some of the other improvements we've made on the transfer of funds from vehicle users to transit users, HOV users, has led our board to ask us in 2017 to go out and find additional corridors that we might be able to convert from HOV to HOT, and what that might look like. And as you can see, we were able to identify a number of valid corridors. I think certainly the initial tiers all had HOV lanes that were able to convert, and so we're working actively on that. Right now, we're just starting the design process after we cleared the environmental process on the 105. Do have tolling authority on that from the CTC back in 2019. So we'll hopefully open the 105 corridor in time for the LA Olympics. I guess I'll do my 1 second marketing spiel on that too in 2028. And then the next ones are all the I-10 extension out to the San Bernardino County line to meet the San Bernardino I-10 express lanes from their service into LA County. And then we're working on the I-405 corridor, which is famously congested corridor in the LA basin. And that's all I have. I have questions here, but we'll wait till the end of the presentation for that, I guess. I'm happy to hang around.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you hanging around. Thanks for that presentation. And just to reiterate, yeah, I do see there's a couple of hands up. We will have opportunity for public comment, and that can include questions of the panelists when we get there. But for now, we're going to go to our next speaker. Very happy to introduce Christa Cassidy. Christa is a planner with HNTB, who is contract staff for the San Mateo County Express Lanes Joint Powers Authority. And she's going to talk to us about the equity program that they are implementing there on the 101 Express Lanes. Over to you, Christa.
Thanks, Autumn. Let's see here if I can get my presentation mode going. Let's see. Let's do full screen here. Let's see. Are you seeing a full screen, or are you seeing?
We're seeing your notes, and I feel like this is what always happens to me too.
I might just, let's see here. I might just make this small, if that's not too distracting. Does that work?
For me.
Okay. Yep. Great. Thanks for bearing with me. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today to tell you a little bit more about the San Mateo 101 Express Lanes Community Transportation Benefits Program, newly branded. So let's get started. I'm going to run us through the 101 Express Lanes project, just to give you a little background, the equity study that we conducted, just give you an overview of that, and then tell you about the resulting equity program. Let's see here. Oh, sorry. A couple screens going. So just to give you a sense for who the key players are, the 101 Express Lanes in San Mateo County is governed by the San Mateo County Express Lanes JPA board. And that board is supported by the policy program manager, which is HNTB, who I'm representing today, and then the JPA Executive Council, and that is comprised of the City County Association of Governments of San Mateo County and the San Mateo County Transit Authority. And it's sort of the joining of two different agencies. So I just wanted to make that clear, sort of who's involved. The 101 Express Lanes project was really born out of a recognition that congestion on the US 101 was continuing to worsen, is continuing to worsen as employment and housing and population growth all increases. And by 2040, San Mateo County is expected to see an additional 135,000 jobs and 60,000 new households. And there's currently very little incentive for people to rideshare within the 101 corridor in San Mateo County. So as a result, vehicle trips are expected to increase. And there's actually quite a big issue with spillover traffic into surrounding communities as a result. We've talked a little bit about this. I think Mark really teed me up for this, but I'll just quickly run through what an express lane is. It's in this case, it's buses, vans, and carpools of 3 or more people using the lane for free. Carpools with 2 or more people receiving a discount, and then other drivers in single occupancy vehicles paying to use the lane, choosing to pay to use the lane with dynamic tolls and dynamic prices that change throughout the day, depending on, oops, I think these are supposed to be hidden. Depending on just the flow. So why did the JPA decide on an express lane and not a carpool lane? Well, so through some modeling work, they found that essentially with a regular HOV 2+ carpool lane, there were too many vehicles. With the HOV 3+, there were too few vehicles, and that with the express lane, the pricing really helped balance it out in such a way that the number of single occupancy vehicles that were accessing the express lane means that the lane was going to operate right at around, at or above 45 miles per hour, which is considered the minimum free flow speed by federal standards. So the thing is, express lanes and congestion pricing schemes generally tend to raise a number of equity concerns. So there are concerns that the pricing is seen as a regressive fee, a regressive charge. There's concerns about those who are unbanked or underbanked being able to access the lanes due to technological barriers with the way that people pay for the lanes. There's a potential for more benefits to accrue to higher income drivers. This idea of of express lanes being, quote unquote, Lexus lanes. And then there are environmental justice impacts on surrounding communities around lanes if they're indeed building a new lane. So the JPA, they commissioned a study from Arup, and Arup was the lead consultant, and then Estelano Advisors was the sub-consultant conducting community engagement, and Autumn and I were key staff on this when we both worked at Arup. And so the intention of the study was to develop an equity program that provides meaningful mobility benefits to historically underserved communities within the county. And what we wanted was for the program to be, the resulting program to be flexible so that it can evolve over time. And especially as we're living through a pandemic and the communities that we're focused on in this study are being the hardest hit by COVID, what works for them this year is might not work for them in 2025. And so we want to be able to keep this flexible to meet community needs. The actual express lanes revenue will depend on the use of tolls and other factors. And so more revenue could be available in the future when other financial commitments like the loan for construction on the express lanes has been met. So if it's not clear, the revenue from the express lanes is meant to fund this forthcoming equity program. So I just wanted to take a minute to walk you through the equity study process that we went through in order to get to our final preferred equity program. We first developed a vision and desired outcomes with the JPA board's blessing, and then we embarked on a first phase of community outreach to really understand what transportation challenges were for folks in San Mateo County. We did a full scan of existing local studies to just piggyback on any other community outreach that had been done to understand what kind of needs we could meet through the revenue from the express lanes. We defined those targeted communities. We did a full literature review on congestion pricing and equity, and then from there, we're able to develop 10 preliminary alternatives. And we screened those through a variety of different metrics like alignment with community feedback or the ease of implementation. And we developed 4 alternatives from there. And those were, the first one was an express lanes benefit, so money to use the express lanes, a transit benefit, which is money to use transit, place-based improvements, so things like improving a sidewalk in an underserved community or putting in a bus shelter. And the last one was a carpool rewards program. And so from there, we took those alternatives and we brought them back out to the community to understand, what resonates, what sounds good, what's going to really meet your needs. And we also did a technical evaluation to see how these alternatives performed through qualitative and quantitative metrics that we had developed. And that's how we got to our preferred program alternative. I thought it might be interesting for this group to just get some high level insight into what we heard in that outreach. So in the first phase, when we were identifying the community challenges, what we heard was that the main challenges were around unreliable public transportation, a high cost of transportation, both for drivers and transit users, specifically related to Caltrain, and then too much traffic. And then when we put forth the 4 equity program alternatives, what we heard were that the money for express lanes use and for transit had the most support, and particularly a hybrid of these alternatives, but that the amount that we were proposing, $50, was too low to be meaningful. We did perform a technical evaluation. This map shows the targeted geographies that we identified as priorities for the study. They were selected based on their proximity to the freeway and then a number of other demographic characteristics like income or minority population. But we did not end up limiting eligibility for the program based on these areas. This was really just for analysis only. So the one thing that I did want to spend a minute on here were some of our findings from the literature review, and I'll just highlight 3 of them, and you'll have this in your board packet to look at later. But the 3 things that I think are sort of interesting to highlight on our scan of congestion pricing and equity literature is that 1, congestion pricing schemes are generally more equitable than the status quo of unpriced roads. 2, that revenue redistribution is key to equitable outcomes. And then 3, that low-income drivers are a small share of peak period traffic, and therefore they are less likely to pay the highest tolls. And so where we landed was with this program that we are calling the 101 Express Lanes Community Transportation Benefits Program, which provides the option of either a Clipper card, so transit pass for the 20-something transit agencies in the 9 counties, that has a value of $100, and that's an annual recurring benefit, or a fast track toll transponder with a value of $100. This is a one-time benefit. And so the bottom line is that this program is intended to provide choice, and the choice is a direct outcome of the community engagement that we did and an understanding that there's no one right benefit for everybody. People are eligible if they are a resident of San Mateo County, if they're 18 and older, if they are receiving at least one benefit already through the Core Services Network Agency, which is a network of social services agencies in the county, or if they have an individual income at or below 60% of the county AMI, which is $76,000. So we are partnering with the Samaritan House, which is for the program administration. They are the leading social services agency in San Mateo County. They know who the community is, who's coming in to seek benefits. We're really, they're experienced in administering benefits to this population and the people who need help most. And so it's intended to meet people where they are, where they're already going and seeking support for food or housing. This provides sort of another benefit around transportation that didn't previously exist. So Samaritan House is going to be this public face of the program. They're going to promote and educate their clients about the program. They're going to enroll people in the program. They're really going to help us make this a big success, because that's not in our wheelhouse to do it. And they know the folks that are seeking the services most. I wanted to give you a sense for the data that we're collecting sort of in service to this notion of the program being iterative and always sort of being flexible to meet changing community needs. So we'll do sort of the standard demographic data collection, but we're also doing a heavy amount of qualitative data collection that the program associates at the Samaritan House and the other social services networks will be collecting. So it'll be how are you using this benefit? If you're selecting the fast track benefit, what would it take for you to take bus or rail instead of a car? Do you have a smartphone? And if so, what would you be able to use a transportation app? Really trying to get a better sense for who's using this program and what their needs really are, and if we can adapt the program in some way to better meet those needs. So this is my last slide here. It's just wanted to give you a sense for where we are in the process. We are doing a training of Samaritan House this month. Next month, Samaritan House is going to do a training with those other 7 service agencies in the county. The express lanes will open in mid-February. The Community Transportation Benefits Program is going to launch in late February, and then next year we'll evaluate the program impact, and then we'll update it based on the feedback that we've heard. So I'm really happy to be able to share the program with all of you today. I'm excited to hear some of your questions, and thanks for bearing with me with some of these screen sharing issues I was having.
Great. Thank you so much, Krista. It's just very exciting to hear how that program is continuing to evolve, and I think a really exciting model. So great to have you with us. So our final speaker is Kristina Svensk from SACOG. Of course, I know many of you know her. She is the Director of Transportation for SACOG, and she's going to talk to us briefly about the regional context for the YOLO 80 Managed Lanes project, and also thoughts about opportunities to fully fund the project and move it forward. Over to you, Kristina.
Thank you. Let me share my screen, and hopefully I share the right one. Are y'all seeing my slides?
Yep, we see them.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me today, and thanks to everybody who presented before me. There was a lot of really great information. I know I was taking some notes, as were I'm sure some of my colleagues that were listening. Lots of great stuff to share. So as Autumn mentioned, I am going to be talking about the YOLO 80 improvement project and a little bit of our strategy and at least our thinking of where we might go to fill a funding gap. So as we all know, the project was recently awarded an infra grant from the federal government of about $86 million, which left a funding gap of about $40 million when you look at the actual scope of the project. The project's EIR, which is currently underway, actually analyzes a broader scope or a broader project than what was scoped for that grant application. And it included elements like toll lanes, regional express bus service, and some additional safety improvements for bicycles. So a lot of what some of the previous speakers were talking about. And this is really key in the ability for YCTD, Caltrans, and SACOG to expand funding options to help fill that gap and then some. And kind of really important to note here too is that this project is really a massive investment and is a prioritized project in the Mega Region Initiative, which looks at connecting multiple regions in Northern and Central California. So managed lanes with pricing, like some of the previous examples, are critical elements of our region's Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. So in our view, they're vital components of GHG reduction strategy, mostly because they have positive influence and impacts to our ability to provide high frequency transit service in the region. So essentially, as others noted, the highway network will not only help feed the demand for increased transit service, but can help generate revenues that will help pay for the operation. So from a funding strategy and opportunity perspective, we're at somewhat of an advantage in that the new federal programs emerging from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, have increased focus on core concepts like equity, air quality, climate resiliency, among others, all things that California has already prioritized. So to begin thinking about a funding strategy, we'll need to think about our project and focus on the strengths and the desired outcomes and how they align with some of these federal priorities. This helps tighten up the ask, so to speak, and hone in on some of the key concepts that we think will increase competitiveness among those programs. What we really want to do is make sure that we're consistent and complementary to federal, state, and regional goals. So those 5 circles that you see there on the bottom, those are some of the federal pillars and federal goals with programs. So the current phase of the project, as I mentioned, was funded by INFRA, which is a major federal infrastructure program. We have the ability to look to additional federal programs that are emerging from the IIJA that could be leveraged. There's a whole bunch of new programs that are coming out. We're all still learning about what those programs are and what the timing is on them, but there are a few that we think could potentially be leveraged for this project. And I'm only going to highlight a few of them on here. So the Mega Region, or the Mega Projects, excuse me, is a new competitive program that's geared towards really complex projects that have the potential to generate national and regional economic mobility or safety benefits. And they might include highway or bridge projects or public transportation projects, among others. This source might be a bit challenging because there is a specific minimum dollar amount that may exceed that gap that we're looking to fill, but there's still kind of more to come on this as we learn more about it and what I will speak to in a few moments of really defining the project and really trying to understand what it is that we're trying to get at. Because if there are additional elements in the EIR that we want to add into the project, we might need more than that $40 million funding gap. So there's options. Build or raise are some additional major infrastructure programs that could be utilized. Raise is something that's familiar to YCTD. They were just awarded some funds for the trail project. Congratulations, by the way. But this could be an option for certain aspects of the project. You know, we have to be cognizant to the fact that there was just an award, so we don't know how they will take to, you know, back-to-back awards, but we don't want to write that one off yet. Another interesting one is the PROTECT grants. Those are new. It stands for Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation. So these can be used for projects that enhance resiliency of infrastructure assets, including projects that improve the resilience of surface transportation assets and evacuation routes. So there could be some elements of the program or the project that could qualify for that type of funding as well. And lastly, congestion relief program. which provides competitive grants for projects in large urbanized areas to advance innovative, integrated, and multimodal solutions to congestion relief. So the goals are really what are consistent with the goals of our project, which is to reduce highway congestion, increase economic and environmental benefits, and reduce costs related to congestion, and optimize existing highway capacity and usage of our transit system. There's a whole slew of things that could be included under that type of project, and it could be deployment and operation of mobility services, or systems that implement or enforce high occupancy vehicle toll lanes, cordon pricing, parking pricing, congestion pricing. There's a whole bunch. So there's a lot of opportunity there on the federal side. There is also opportunity on the state and regional side. So within SB1, which we all know is our state program here with the gas tax, there's two key programs that we would be looking at. There is the Solutions for Congested Corridors, which is a competitive grant program that invests in multimodal solutions on highly congested corridors like I-80. There's also the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which is another competitive program, and that's the state's version of infra, basically. And both of those are administered by the California Transportation Commission. We at SACOG hold a regional funding program, which is another option. We're kind of in a unique position as a state where a substantial share of federal funds are apportioned to the state and then sub-allocated by formula to MPOs. So what we do is we pull together, excuse me, federal and state funds for a biennial funding round, and we administer that as a competitive grant program. We are currently finalizing our timeline and plan for this upcoming funding round, and that will likely span over 2022 and 2023. So for the next steps, we know we have options, but we really need to focus on how we move forward with a strategy. So from SACOG's perspective, I would say that the first step is to continue working together as a region. Partnership is going to be incredibly important for any future funding that we are trying to go after. SACOG, as our MPO here in the region, is wholly committed to working with YCTD and Caltrans, who's an incredibly important partner on this project, as we see this as very critical to our region. We also need to start to continue conversations with federal folks at the DOT as well as the CTC. So those folks can provide a lot of insight, a lot of feedback, and can give us some guidance on how we can and will eventually end up moving forward. And as I mentioned before, we need to take another look at the project. What was scoped, what was in the EIR, and really identify what's key for our ability to get more funding and what can make it more competitive. And then from there, we can collectively develop a funding strategy and hopefully obtain the necessary funding that we need to move forward with this project. It's going to be a very busy but competitive year for federal and state programs. So starting early is going to be really beneficial, which is why I kind of emphasize the partnership thing and starting now, building together. We anticipate that some of the federal programs are going to be coming out very soon. RAISE potentially is going to be released this month. Mega projects might be next month. So the clock is ticking. So having these kinds of presentations and these kinds of conversations is great. On the state side, SB1 programs will have a call for projects in the fall. So a little bit more time if that's the route that we think will be most viable for us. And then I mentioned our regional funding program will likely be this year and next year as well. So right now it's more about just starting the conversations and working with our partners with Caltrans and YCTD and finding ways that we can support them from a regional perspective to strengthen their process and their strategy for moving forward. So trying to keep it a little bit lighter. You guys had a lot of information there with the previous speakers, which was awesome. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with everybody as we move forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kristina, and thank you everyone for your great presentations. And as I'm just happy to note that in addition to getting all that information, we're actually pretty much on schedule. So I want to turn it back over to our chair, Dawn, to